We're going to take a look at another technique for use on the snow. This technique is one of the most famous techniques. If you're talking about mountaineering and you're talking about snow, it's self-arrest. But we're going to differentiate this. We're going to do self-arrest without an ice axe, which in my opinion is actually more important than learning how to do self-arrest with an ice axe, because a lot of times if I'm not doing glacier mountaineering, I don't carry an ice axe with me, and I may still want to cross steep slopes, like maybe I'm leading a early spring backpacking trip, or maybe I'm going out to do a scramble with my friends and I want to keep my gear light. It's also really helpful because there's a chance you could drop your axe, or someone else drops their axe and you let them borrow your axe because you know how to do self-arrest without an axe and the snow conditions allow for it. Which brings me to my first point. This is not an acceptable technique or not an ideal technique to use if the snowpack is at all hard or has icy spots in it. For that you would want an actual ice axe. But you know, right now it's kind of mid-May and we've got snow. It's been pretty sunny, so as long as I'm not out at night, if the temperatures are low at night, that wouldn't be good. But right now in the middle of the day, soft snow, even if it's a steep slope, I would be very comfortable doing self-arrest without an ice axe. So we're going to take a look at the position for self-arrest. So first thing to keep in mind is we are trying to minimize the surface area of contact with the snow. And provided our body weight doesn't change magically, that means we're going to end up with more pressure. We're going to have the same amount of weight, our body, on less surface area, which equals more pressure, which equals more penetration into the snowpack. So we want to combine pressure with stability, right? So we're not going to balance on one finger like a circus act. So let's take a look at what self-arrest without an ice axe might look like here. So should I slip? Okay, so the first thing that I do is I want to make sure that I flip onto my stomach, whether I'm on my back or head down, head up slope, it doesn't matter. You want to flip yourself over onto your stomach. And the next thing that I'm going to do is get my hips well up off the snow. So you may see some self-arrest where people are pushing down into the snow and lifting up with their feet. That's not at all what I want to do in this circumstance, because you can see if I am here on the snowpack and I go like this, I turn myself into a sled. This snow is pretty sticky and not particularly steep, but had we been on a steeper slope, it may start to slide. Okay, so I'm going to get my hips up and out of the snow, and I'm going to get my feet down and into the snow. Notice I don't have crampons on. When I get into self-arrest with an ice axe, we have an ice axe and an ice axe is needed, then you probably need crampons too. So I'll cover ice axe with crampons and self-arrest with crampons and an ice axe in the next video. For this, we're going to come down, get your hips nice and high in a nice pike position, and I'm going to have my feet a little bit more than shoulder width apart, and I'm going to kick with my feet. This is probably the most important part of the self-arrest position. A lot of people focus on their upper body or on the ice axe itself, but even with an ice axe, the feet play a very important role more often than not. I'm going to kick in, and I usually find 3 kicks is about right to get established, but you need to do as many kicks as necessary, and the harder you can kick into the slope, the bigger pocket you're going to make down into the snow, and the more downward force you can resist. If it's only you sliding down, that's self-arrest. There's usually not a huge amount of force involved, and you can usually kick enough to stabilize yourself and stop a fall, provided it's not really, really hard snow. If you're doing team arrest, then you might have other people sliding down. You may even have a tiny bit of time to get down and kick in and get established before the load comes onto you and shock loads you. And you want to make sure that you have your feet well into the snowpack before that load comes onto your harness. Okay, so that's the first part, your feet kicking in, hips up. Next thing you'll see is my arms. So here's the stability. By going into my feet, I'm reducing my surface area contact, which increases pressure. But my upper body, I need some stability so I don't lose this position as I go whipping down the slope. So here I'm coming onto my forearms. Okay, some people say you can drive your elbows into the slope. I think that's fine too in soft snow, right? But more than likely, if it's hard snow, which is when you would really need to add friction. Then by going up on your elbows, you can start abrading your elbows. So I typically will go down like this, and I will simply make like a triangle, and I will make a fist with one hand and cup over it with the other, kind of like bowing to your sifu in Chinese martial arts. And the reason I do that is by making a fist, I protect my fingers from getting caught up on bumps in the ice or snowpack, and I protect my fingers with the other hand by doing the same, by cupping it around to some degree. Not ideal, but it's what I've got, okay? The other thing that this sort of triangle does is if there is any loose snow on the surface of the harder snowpack, or if it's a soft snowpack in general, then this triangle shape will start to gather snow. And this wedge shape, for those skiers out there, right, you know that when you do this, it starts to create a lot of friction. It pulls your legs out. So in skiing, you make your wedge this way, right, and make sort of a pizza shape. But here, if it starts pulling my arms out, it pulls my hands into each other, and I start to make a big snowball, which increases friction. It helps me slow down to stop. Okay, so I'm just gonna do this in place right here. If I fall on my back or on my butt, I roll over and immediately go into my self-arrest without an ice axe position. The last thing you'll notice is I've turned my head and tucked my neck into my shoulder, and I'm looking downslope. This accomplishes two things. Number one, it protects my face and my eyes from the rough surface of the snow or ice. And if there's any ice flying up, I can keep my vision. Hopefully I also have protective eyewear on. And number two, it allows me to see what's coming. Oftentimes, I have some small ability to steer myself with my feet if there's a large rock coming up. Okay, sometimes you find yourself out on a snow slope. You didn't realize that there would be hard snow slopes where you're out, and you didn't have an option to go another way and avoid them. So this might be typical of people doing long distance hiking, like people doing the Pacific Crest Trail, where you're still going up and over mountain passes. You might be traveling light, and the idea of carrying an ice axe so far, especially when you didn't know you were going to need it, was not on your mind. So if I encounter a snow slope like this, one thing I can do is I can grab a rock, and thankfully if you're in a mountain environment where snow slopes tend to be later in the season, there's probably rocks nearby. Now, I would choose a rock over a tree branch simply because tree branches, especially out here in the Northwest, conifers like fir, can be pretty bendy, and the wood may not be sharp enough to penetrate a hard snowpack that really requires some sort of assistance to self-arrest. If the snow is soft at all, I just walk across and I do self-arrest without an axe. Okay? Just to mention, if you don't need to do the slope, even if it costs you a lot of energy, you know, 1,000-foot loss in gain, it's something to consider. Because if you cross the slope and you slide and you don't have the proper tools, crampons would be my number one tool, ice axe would be maybe number two. If you slip on that kind of a slope and you can't self-arrest, it could be pretty dire consequences, especially if you're out in the wilderness area. But if you don't have an option, then a piece of rock may suffice. Now there's two ways I could use a piece of rock. Number one, I could use a rock to cut steps. This requires a lot of balance on my part, and I may go out without my backpack and cut steps with my pack on the side of the slope and then come back with my pack after having done that. So I have those existing steps to use. Or I could use the rock for self-arrest itself. So I'll just demonstrate. So this rock that I've grabbed here, it's relatively small. I find if I grab a big rock, it throws my balance off. It can be hard to hold on to, and it's more likely that I drop it. So relatively small, has a nice cutting edge on it, easy to hold on to and chop those steps. So as I come across the slope, my snowpack is starting here. I'll chop sideways into the slope, and I'll spend as much time as I need to on each of these steps, especially a short snow patch like this. You know, time hopefully isn't a big issue. If you know that you're going to encounter a series of these sort of avalanche chutes that you have to cross with hardened snow, then again, consider whether it's essential to cross. Okay, so then I'd step in that, and then I'm crossing and chopping my next one. Okay? You may want to have a trekking pole in your uphill hand. I find since I'm crouching down, the trekking pole sometimes just gets in the way, and I'll use my uphill hand for balance. Okay? Now, just to be clear, this slope is very unrealistic. This is not steep enough, nor is it hard enough for me to do this, but this is simply for demonstration. Okay, if I'm going to use this for self-arrest, ideally a longer rock is nice, but if you can't find a long rock that's thin and it's heavier, then I prefer to go with a rock like this for self-arrest. I'm going to use a self-arrest technique that's very similar to self-arrest without an ice axe should I fall down. So should I fall and I start to slide, I roll over, and you can see this provides quite a bit of friction on the surface as it enters. I need both hands on that piece of rock to hold on to it properly. I turn my face away so I don't hit myself in the teeth with my own rock, and I use my body position and my feet primarily, and the rock secondarily, to slow me down and add enough friction simply so I can get my feet into the snowpack. Let's take a look at that one more time. I'll spin the opposite way this time.